Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. My name is Mona El-Kafif. I'm an associate professor at UVA and the director of our urban design programs at the School of Architecture. I'm excited to welcome you all today to the second panel of our virtual symposium, Powering a Just Global Energy Transition, a Lithium Trilogy. The three-part event is a part of a larger research project entitled Lithium Territories that investigate the socio-environmental, spatial, economic, and temporal entanglements of the just energy transition. This academic initiative is a collaboration between Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, the University of Michigan, and the University of Virginia. The project is sponsored by a grant that co-PIs Maria Aquero, Ayla Berman, Alexandra Bosch, and myself received from the UVA Center for Global Inquiry and Innovation to build a larger network of experts in the field and integrate these topic areas into our curriculum. Our joint research agenda addresses a pressing global challenge, the mandate to take climate action and to reverse the path towards planetary collapse. Using lithium as a critical matter powering the energy transition, we examine its life cycle from the extraction to manufacturing, consumption, and recycling to understand the socio-environmental and economic relationships. By connecting our cell phone terminals, electric car batteries to lithium mines in Chile, manufacturing plants in the Asian Pacific region, and gigafactories in the US, we hope to trace the global flows that power energy aspects of our lives and transform ecosystems and livelihoods globally. This symposium was co-organized by Professor Jimena Arizaga from PUC, Maria Aquero from Michigan, who is going to moderate the session today, our two graduate research assistants, Joaquin Leo and Meredith Huth, and myself. Please stay tuned for our upcoming panels and the keynote featured on the slides here. All information can also be accessed through our website, www.lithiumterritories.net. And with this, I'm handing it over to Maria.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. We are really excited to welcome you all to this session. This slide is just to remind us that last week we initiated the symposium with a session devoted to destruction. Our colleague Jimena Arizaga was leading this conversation. And today I'm going to expand a little bit our conversation to include some of the students that are participating in the studio that we are running here from Michigan. And they're going to be sharing with us a little bit of the work that they have been doing.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Mona and Alejandra, and also thank you to our panelists today. So we're the students here in the Lithium Urbanity studio. We wanted to give you all a warm welcome and just share a few of the images from the work that we've been doing to really situate lithium manufacturing and distribution. And it's just going to be brief. We're not going to lecture you. So kind of the way that we've really been looking at lithium is we've been kind of thinking of manufacturing at different scales. So for example, in this image, you can kind of see more of a global approach, how we've been looking at lithium all across the world, different countries that manufacture lithium or that are just kind of involved in the lithium trade altogether. And over here, for example, you can see the different companies that are involved with lithium manufacturing in the US, a lot of companies. So there's a lot of activity happening in the US. Similarly, in China, there's also a lot of lithium activity happening in China. China is actually kind of almost the epicenter of lithium manufacturing and processing at the moment, which you'll kind of see later on in a few of our other slides. This is just kind of an example of a lithium supply chain, which shows extraction in Chile, processing in China, kind of EV battery assembly in Japan, and then sales in the US. So this is just an example of one of the possible lithium supply chains that exist at the moment. This is a bit more of a detailed look at the lithium supply chain, really showing you the different countries that are involved with mining, processing, manufacturing, and EV assembly. Just one of the things that I want to point out in this is that you can really see China, for example, in processing. You can see the big share that China has at the moment in the amount of processing that it is involved in. And this is just kind of another example of the future of lithium flow. So it just kind of shows the kind of the life cycle of lithium from supply to manufacturing to distribution, and then eventual sales. And so this is just another example of some of the lithium mines that we hope to see as a studio as we venture off next week on our road trip, where we look at these different sites. And yeah, the Infinite Highway.
Thank you so much. All right. One second that we are organizing ourselves here. Oh my God. I was gonna do it the other way around. Okay. All right, Young, you wanna come? So we are gonna go and introduce the panelists, and then I'm gonna do a little overview before I turn to our three panelists so that they can get us started. So, Young?
I will introduce Master Sieber. Master Sieber is an assistant professor in landscape architecture at UVA. His research and teaching challenges dominates modes of knowledge production, exploring alternative methodology and immersive representational tools to cultivate a pluralistic understanding of being in the world. Matthew's work encourages us to rethink our position and relation to the world as the first step in the theory of change world towards a just future. Matthew's research with collaborators has been published by Rhetoric Press in Atlas of Material Worlds, Mapping the Agency of Matter. His new book project, tentatively titles The Dark Side of Green, a narrative atlas of costs and cautions behind our clean energy utopia, is an edited collection telling us the oft revealing stories of contestation, exploration, and correlation with the landscape upon which the world's green energy transaction depends. Thanks so much.
Dr. Marina Octor is an architect and researcher. She is head of MA Social Design, Master at Design Academy, Harvard, and prior to that, she was director of research at Nuvi Institute, where she led initiatives focused on labor extraction and mental health. Her extensive work spans exhibitions, writings, cultural activities. Just to name some of her work related to lithium, we would like to highlight lithium state of exhaustion, compulsive desire on lithium extraction and repelling mountains, lithium state of exhaustion and a matter of data. Marina is the recipient of the Wheelwright Prize for the project Future Storage Architecture to host the metaverse.
I'm here to welcome Scott Campbell, who's an associate professor of urban and regional planning at Tobin College. And Scott specializes in planning theory, sustainability, economic development, and regional planning. His publications include The Rise of the Gun Belt, The Military Remapping of Industrial America, and Readings in Planning Theory, Readings in Urban Theory. His writings on sustainable development won a National Planning Award from the American Planning Association. And now I'll give the floor to Maria to say a few words and introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for your passion. We are trying to develop a participatory approach to the panel. So here we go. All right, so I just want to say a few words before we turn the floor to our panelists, so that we can share with you the ways in which we have been approaching this particular topic and dealing with manufacturing and distribution of all things lithium. The race to increase lithium-based battery manufacturing capacity worldwide is redrawing the global economic order. National investment priorities signal major opportunities for economic development and are already driving massive socio-spatial transformations from cities' cores to distant hinterlands. A new geographical order is taking shape. New extractive technologies are enabling more distributed mining prospecting, and federal funding is fueling the decentralization of traditional manufacturing. We care a lot about that because here we are at the heart of the manufacturing of the Rust Belt. As a result, states are competing to attract multi-billion, there you go, see, multi-billion dollar battery gigafactories and are adding more and more infrastructure to serve and connect them. While this massive mobilization of public funding is animating the economy, this approach carries deep contradictions and requires critical examination. And not last, as we speak, we are entangled in the UAW strike that, as you know, is having big reverberations, but is very much centered and taking place here as we speak, and we try to reflect on what is the future of manufacturing and what is going to be the future of more fair labor structures. But we are also urbanists, architects, landscape architects, and we are very much in the business of imagining what our agency can be, and going from provocations in which we are being presented with the way in which many of these projects are actually taking place with very little design, but very sophisticated performance. And also understanding that much of the development that we are seeing is actually coming out of massive investment. In this case, these are the words of Jennifer Granholm, reminding us how lithium has become a matter of national security. And as such, that is providing and prioritizing a lot of investment and trying to accelerate what that investment is due as we are in a way, racing towards this clean energy manufacturing transition. For us, as we are investigating the standard operative geographies of the lithium cycle, we are interested in contending with claims of greenwashing that are actually surrounding the metal instrumentality when we discuss how to power the green energy transition. And for that, we have been reading and we have been expanding our engagement with many other disciplines beyond design, so that we can more deeply conceptualize and problematize in which ways we could be approaching some of these issues. In our studio, we are contending with the just energy transition and interrogating what that may mean for our work and how we may be resituating our agency as designers in space, and what that may mean for us to consider that much of the development that we see happening is really very far away from our everyday experience, taking place in what we refer as the hinterlands. That's our interest to travel to actually engage in our site visit with some of these sites and some of these projects that are, as I say, very far removed from our understanding of where all the technologies that we consume and the energy that powers our days, our everyday, is actually being generated. And last but not least, in a way, embracing how Neil Brenner invites us as designers to bring our unique capacities and our unique spatial intelligence to actually advance these agendas that speak to more socially progressive, politically inclusive, and egalitarian and ecological ways as we think in the future. For us, the opportunity to have you today with us in this panel is incredible. We have been scrutinizing and learning about your work, and we are truly excited to welcome you and get into a conversation. As you are going to be helping us to further situate how our work may be engaging with many of these threats. So with no more further ado, I would like to invite Matthew to get us going, and then we'll have Marina, and then Scott will help us to discuss and situate a little bit critically the conversation so that we can have a well-participated conversation with questions and answers. Thank you so much, everybody, and Matthew, thank you. I'll let you get us going.
Thank you. Let's see. Everyone see that okay?
Yes, we are.
Wonderful. Well, yes, thank you to all the organizers, particularly Maria and Mona. Really appreciate kind of being part of this discussion, and look forward to seeing or hearing about other people's work as well. Also want to credit my research assistants, Joyce Fong, Julian McNally, and Mercer Walrath, who over the last couple of years have all contributed in some way or another to this work around kind of critical minerals that I've been pursuing. And I mean, though my research is a bit more kind of focused on extraction and kind of landscapes of extraction, I'm really taking this opportunity to look into the landscapes of EV and battery manufacturing and how they're positioned in kind of a larger relationship to the previous Lithium Trilogy session on extraction that will hopefully also sow some new seeds for the forthcoming one. So to kind of set the stage, and maybe this doesn't need to be quite set because we're quite aware of it, particularly kind of living through this past summer. But I mean, just this past July was declared the planet's hottest month on record by quite a significant margin, really the hottest in 120,000 years. Even the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called it or stated it as kind of the era of global boiling has begun. I mean, there's been precedent-defying heat waves that broiled regions around the world, Canadian wildfire smoke that's blanketed large parts of North America for the better part of the summer, including down here in Charlottesville, devastating floods in India, South Sudan, Italy, and others. And I don't know if you guys read the headlines, but they're even talking about how the Gulf Stream itself could collapse as early as 2025. And this list is kind of quickly multiplying. Amidst kind of all the smoke-laden air and sort of inundated lands, there have been a few glimmers of hope, fortunately. For instance, in 2022, President Biden invoked the Defense Production Act, as well as signing the Inflation Reduction Act to accelerate the transition to renewable energy. And though it's certainly kind of insufficient kind of to the global crisis, it was a transformative win, at least on paper. I mean, the IRA provided $370 billion in incentives, grants, and loan guarantees to clean energy, covering everything from heat pumps to hydrogen production. Within the U.S., they claim that more than 100,000 green jobs have been created. More than 185 clean energy and electric vehicle projects have been announced, which we'll get into a little bit more momentarily here, with investments of more than $83 billion since the passage about a year ago. So really significant investment and catalyst for change. Though what these developments really make clear is that kind of behind the sunny headlines and these kind of figures ripe for campaign trails is that the U.S.'s and really much of the global North's answer to climate change is essentially eco-modernism, or kind of this belief that technological innovation can kind of beautifully temper the lethal certainty of climatic bedlam, or kind of solve this climate crisis. The idea is that cities will be blanketed with solar panels, traversed in an army of EVs, linked with a smart grid containing batteries in mammoth proportions, and then traveled between in hydrogen-fueled aircrafts. But really, this new way of life is conditioned very critically on extracting massive quantities of critical minerals, as this map begins to sort of highlight a few of them, lithium being in the sort of gold yellow. And in fact, I mean, at the Toronto Global Forum just last year, it was stated that just in the next 2 decades, we will need to mine as much as all of human history combined, which is really kind of hard to wrap your head around. But yeah, and also quite daunting in a lot of ways, and really speaks to the effect that this will have across the world, from landscapes of extraction to manufacturing, as we'll see, all the way to kind of deployment of these technologies. And so the modern global economy's operation is kind of centered around fossil fuels and this unquenchable profit accumulation. It really appears to kind of already be calcified into the green energy transition, which is marketed to save us from its predecessor's very world order. And as critical minerals and renewable energy landscapes are increasingly considered commodities and sites of national security across the world, the position of states and corporations has only been strengthened to push aside any obstacle in the name of maximum progress. And so this power dynamic, with its roots deeply established under colonialism, and as you saw in the previous map, there's a real disparity between kind of climate change responsibility and risks. And so that this power dynamic really exists across all points of capitalist production, from extraction to refining, manufacturing, consumption, all the way to waste and recycling. And so this is what I've kind of what I've been calling the dark side of grain. Also kind of questioning that phrasing, because in many ways it plays into kind of the Republican playbook, for lack of a better way to describe it. But there is this really long list of costs of ecological, cultural, physiological, really substantial body of largely unseen externalities lurking behind every node in the green energy supply chain. And so this colonialism is enduring. I mean, for instance, well, you have global north is sort of perpetuating this exploitation of global south, the indigenous, the poor, etc. Specifically in the U.S., I'm sure a lot of people here today are well aware of the Thacker Pass lithium project, in which the U.S., I should say the Shoshone and Paiute tribes are kind of being dispossessed of their sacred lands for this material, kind of sacred to the green energy economy, that of lithium. And this is happening all over the world. I mean, Greenland communities still suffering the consequences of previous uranium mining or newly sought for the rare earth minerals. In the Congo, mushrooming demand for cobalt has really kind of constructed a profession of artisanal miners, many of which are children. And you can also see here in this map all these sort of yellow points are sort of prospective mines. And so it seems like every day brings a new headline of a new sort of prospective mine where they're trying to sort of locate and extract this vast amount of material that we want. Also, I mean, additionally, I've kind of been interested in the work of this 19th century English economist, William Stanley Jevons, who was very sort of ecologically prescient and would say the demand for new renewable energy is only going to lead to a growing hunger for it and all the material resources it requires. There's this sort of economic sort of concept called the Jevons paradox, named after him, that states that as efficiency and use of a resource increases, consumption of that resource will actually grow instead of decline. So this is very sort of counterintuitive, but he observed that in steam engines and other coal fueled applications, as they kind of improved in efficiency, paradoxically more and more coal was used to fire such engines as their deployment grew in ubiquity, kind of alongside dwindling costs. This efficiency can also accelerate economic growth as profits balloon, really pushing demand even higher. And so the Jevons paradox is thus one such argument, kind of illustrating the fallacy of relying on technological innovation as this eventual salvation. And ultimately, we cannot sort of out-tech climate change as many might want to believe. And to kind of dial into a bit more focused on sort of battery manufacturing. This is a map of the EV and battery manufacturing plants across the U.S. that have sort of ballooned in number over the last couple of years. This is sort of built on top of a base map of the ecoregions of the states, because as we'll see momentarily, these aren't sort of brownfields or urban conditions that they're building these. These are green fields and kind of rural or peri-urban, where they're just sort of clear cutting forests, or even in the case of deserts, sort of just raising these quite rich ecosystems. And so, I mean, pre-Inflation Reduction Act, For instance, in sort of 2019, there were just 2 battery factories that were operating in the US. There were another 2 under construction, but it wasn't until post-IRA that there was this explosion of projects. And so today, and actually I did this quantification maybe like a week ago, so it's probably already changing, but today about 30 battery factories are either planned, under construction, or operational in the US. And it's claimed that $52 billion have been invested in EV and battery manufacturing between August 2022 and March of 2023 in North America EV supply chains. Automakers and battery manufacturers have collectively invested and promised to invest close to $100 billion in building domestic cell and modular manufacturing. And this has enormous implications, and I'm going to go through a few here in a few moments, kind of focused around just space in general, resource use, and then even sort of labor implications. But you can see it in the map kind of have 3 sort of data visualizations for each plant. One that's purely just the facility, or at least I should say the promised gigawatt per hour capacity. That's in blue. So the amount of sort of energy they're planning to kind of produce through this manufacturing of batteries. The other is the facilities just by acreage, so it's more sort of the landscape scale. That's in black. And then you have red as the building footprint itself. And these are just massive buildings. I mean, I think Tesla's Gigafactory in Nevada, it's been active for some years, has claimed it's the largest building in the world. And I think there's competing claims. It's kind of strangely difficult to confirm that. But nonetheless, these are massive facilities. And something else to point out that I'll speak more about here in a few minutes as well is I've also kind of visualized the power plants that are within 25 miles of each facility, because as we'll see, these plants aren't generating their energy themselves. It actually takes a significant amount of energy to make these battery packs and these vehicles. So the first implication I wanted to kind of go through is one very near and dear to designers, that of space. This is a collection of a lot of these facilities, either kind of Google Earth aerials or just sort of planned construction documents, or even marketing kind of materials. And you can already get a sense of kind of some of the size of these, and as well as a general. I mean, maybe it should have cropped out a little bit larger, but you can see how a lot of these are just kind of carving into existing landscapes, whether that's, forest, grassland, desert, etc. And to kind of zoom into kind of a few of them, this is the Hyundai Metaplant site, which is going to be producing both EVs as well as batteries. Has a planned total of 16 million square feet across 3,000 acres, which is kind of roughly the size of London Heathrow Airport. This is currently the largest planned development under the IRA. And so you can kind of get a sense of the scale that we're talking about. And just as sort of a point we'll return to later is that the site has promised around 8,000 jobs to be created at this facility. But in comparison to the airport next to it, has about 76,000 jobs under the sort of same amount of space, or I should say a similar amount of space. So it's incredible how much money is kind of going into these facilities with very little sort of return into kind of the working class pocket. I mean, another example, this is Astra Business Park, where Panasonic is planning to produce an enormous facility.
Clase de paisajismo.
And this is the park itself is going to have a few different businesses associated with it. So it's not the EV battery plant itself that's going to take this footprint, but you can get a sense of kind of the business parks that are associated with these with this development. And so this is obviously sort of being compared against the island of Manhattan. So it's more than half that island. And I've also kind of take a sort of image from my previous book project that was doing a similar comparison of Manhattan Island to the lithium evaporation ponds in the Salar de Atacama in Chile. So you can kind of get a sense that as much talk as there is about kind of the effect of kind of extraction in those landscapes and the scale of that, it's pretty revealing to see how that same scale is being mirrored on a different point of the supply chain, right? Just this manufacturing. And we can obviously trace that moving forward into the deployment as well. Looking into energy, just to give you a little kind of background on sort of the sort of construction of batteries themselves for these electric vehicles. Generally, you start with a cell that then's put into a module that's kind of put into a pack, and there's a few different types of kind of these cells, whether it's cylindrical, prismatic, pouch, etc. Cylindrical is the most commonly used one because that's what's sort of been sort of a convention in battery manufacturing in general, and so it's kind of the cheapest as a result of that. But to make a battery module, manufacturers stack battery cells in series or in parallel in a metal frame that protects the cells from the shocks and vibrations that come with driving. Those modules house several battery cells ranging from fewer than 10 to several hundred, depending on the cell type and vehicle range. And then within each cell, there's kind of 4 key components that make up a battery. And that's as you can kind of see in the bottom right here, that's the anode, the cathode, the sort of separator, and then the electrolyte, which is usually a liquid. Though there's a lot of promise, or at least hope, around what's called a solid state battery, where that electrolyte is a solid. But these so these cells that then are fed into modules are then placed into kind of these larger battery packs. And so in addition to those battery modules, the pack itself includes other components that protect the battery and help it operate within a EV. And all of these components are housed and structured to protect the battery from water, salt, and other outside elements that can really kind of damage the battery as a whole. And kind of the most kind of reasonable assumptions, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to make these calculations, so there's a lot of variability. The most reasonable assumptions for the energy usage for manufacturing a lithium ion battery, which is kind of the most commonly produced one these days for EVs, appears to be something in the range of 50 to 60 kilowatt hours of electricity per single kilowatt of battery capacity. So these batteries are requiring a tremendous amount of energy just to produce them themselves. And what really makes kind of battery manufacturing such a sort of energy hog or kind of consumer is somewhat surprising. It's most of the energy is really around temperature control in the manufacturing. So powders, critical minerals and other things are mixed and liquid is added, kind of turning them into this sort of semi-liquid state known as a slurry. And then that slurry is then kind of pasted onto metal sheets. And a small part of the energy used in manufacturing is these machines that mix, roll, and kind of flatten this material. But that electricity use is really nothing in comparison to other key machines, which are ovens and air conditioners. So heating or kind of cooling different components along the process. So ovens are essential in turning the slurry into a solid that can withstand the rigors of operating for years in an electric car. And the heat removes the slurry's water and chemicals. It's calculated or estimated that about 47% of the energy, so almost half, that's needed to make a battery cell comes from this drying or kind of the recovery of the solvent due to the kind of the long time heating and sort of off-gas cooling. This is according to a 2021 study by Worcester Polytechnic Institute and A123 Systems. But even then, the drying's not done. Some battery materials, particularly nickel, are kind of irreversibly changed by exposure to moisture. So this means that for some kind of finicky materials, the entire battery assembly shop must be enclosed behind plastic sheets in a vast dry room, where air conditioners work constantly to suck that moisture from the air and really keep the humidity levels to a minimum. And this is estimated to be about another 29% of battery manufacturing's energy usage from those air conditioners. So in total, more than 3/4 of a battery's energy use is just the controlling of temperature itself. And I didn't, well, let's stop there momentarily, but so I kind of mentioned the power plants that were near these facilities. I mean, for instance, like Astra Park, as well as some others, have really ambitious plans for these incredibly expansive solar farms or solar fields, which also kind of displace ecosystems. So it's a different a different kind of presentation. But I mean, a really sort of revealing sort of case in point here is that, and this is the Panasonic plant in Kansas. That a nearby coal plant that was planned to be decommissioned is now going to be kept online for indeterminate amount of time because the battery plant needs so much energy. So there's really these other kind of implications around kind of the manufacturing itself that can really kind of dirty up the cleanliness or the sort of supposed cleanliness of these technologies. And then didn't kind of have time to get too deep into it, but there's also a massive kind of consumption of water a lot of the times. For instance, the Samsung's battery factory is kind of planned to be using 2,400 cubic meters per hour of water. So again, this is sort of significant resource use of fresh water that's increasingly becoming less prevalent based on our kind of consumptive habits. And even though, as some might know, the mining process themselves is incredibly water intensive as well. Lithium, I mean, they're kind of evaporating a lot of the brine usually. And there's also the hard rock spodumene, but with the brine, that's where Chile gets their lithium from. It's about sort of sucking up this brine from below, kind of pulling it out into these evaporation ponds, and then letting the sun sort of take that away. And that's having an effect on the larger kind of hydrology and water table of neighboring communities. So the other kind of implication is, as was even kind of highlighted in Mona's opening, is this idea about sort of labor. Anyone who reads the headlines knows about the United Auto Workers strike, which I'll get into kind of momentarily, but there's this great group called Good Jobs First that did this pretty revealing analysis of kind of the IRA subsidies with respect to kind of these new battery factories, and kind of estimating that kind of they average roughly from kind of $2 million to $7 million per job, with kind of the calculation being that a job is equivalent to about $45,000 a year, which is what Ford is offering at their Blue Oval Battery Park in Michigan. And so all this, I mean, an incredibly disproportionate amount of this money coming from the federal government is not ending up in the pockets of workers. I mean, it's for kind of the facilities, it's for kind of other materials, but a lot of that money obviously kind of ends up into the kind of elite kind of owner class, for instance. And there's also, I think very importantly, there's no text in the Inflation Reduction Act that has any sort of specifications about kind of job quality requirements or market-based wages. And so a lot of this money has very few sort of strings attached when it comes to specifications around jobs themselves. And sort of an extreme example is the Ultium plant in Spring Hill, Tennessee, which is a GM and LG joint venture, which has a high subsidy per worker at $7.7 million, which is really kind of jaw-dropping. Be curious to understand where that money is going to. And again, sort of kind of harkening back to this understanding of space. There's, based on our kind of the marketing materials of these different plants and companies, there's an average of 5 workers per acre by site size, and an average of 44 workers per acre by building size, which is one of the key sort of points of kind of potential negotiation with the United Auto Workers is that, and this is just kind of in general with electric vehicles, and increasingly so, in fact, as companies try to bring down prices of these vehicles, is that so much of it is automated. There really aren't that many kind of human laborers involved with this. And that's sort of a key sticking point with the United Auto Workers. And I think actually today they made some progress, or at least that's what the headlines are saying. But just a few days ago, even the CEO of Ford was saying that the union was holding the deal hostage over kind of planned EV battery plants. So the union is very aware of kind of the future implications on kind of labor need for such facilities. And then, I mean, even the CEO himself has said that the EV transition is going to cut 40% of the kind of the union members' jobs. I mean, and current and former union leaders have previously kind of told different news outlets that the battery plants will have to be a priority for the labor organization, regardless of whether they're sort of directly discussed in the national agreement for the long-term kind of viability of the union. But kind of presently, many of the battery plants that have been announced cannot legally be included in the current talks, as they are kind of these joint venture facilities. So there's really a lot of kind of gray areas. So I'm quite kind of keen on seeing how this plays out in the coming weeks. So the question might be, so this is, you know, a lot of doom and gloom. What are we supposed to kind of do? How might we begin to kind of project into the future? And I'm very sort of aware of this question and need, even though it's incredibly challenging. I think kind of one of the most promising, or I should say, revealing kind of studies that have kind of been completed around this, and you know, Maria was even citing Thea Riofrancos in her opening remarks, but her and some other collaborators produced this really amazing report just earlier this year. The sort of short title is More Mobility, Less Mining, or Less Mining, More Mobility. The longer title is Achieving Zero Emissions with More Mobility and Less Mining. And essentially, well, kind of obviously kind of making the argument that there's, what we need is actually less mining and more of these sort of other solutions that ultimately are around mobility. This study was very focused on lithium itself, even though there's a lot of other critical minerals that are very much sort of implicated in these larger dynamics. But they did a really amazing sort of quantification analysis of different scenarios. So you can see sort of along the vertical axis is lithium demand. And then we have three. And so the first one is sort of kind of status quo, or at least the trajectory we're headed, where there's exceptionally large batteries in these vehicles. That's another thing to kind of really kind of be aware of, is that, you know, in line with America's desire for like giant trucks and SUVs, these battery packs are just becoming enormous. And so it's like a massive amount of kind of the materials required that would otherwise be kind of understood as kind of having or being needed for smaller vehicles that could sort of support more people. So this idea of sort of a large battery, no change to vehicle ownership. So again, sort of a one-to-one understanding of just kind of replacing our internal combustion engine cars with electrified ones. And so they go through kind of few scenarios. The first is kind of letting Americans have their giant cars with the corresponding giant battery, but sort of a best case scenario for reducing vehicle ownership, which essentially means more public transportation. It means living in denser sort of cities and environments. It means more electric bikes, or sort of incentives for that. So, you know, a lot of the somewhat historical ideas of kind of urban design in a lot of ways. The other one is that plus the kind of smaller battery, that we don't need these giant SUVs and trucks to, you know, carry around one person and their takeout food or whatever. But if we can sort of decrease the car size, you can reduce the lithium need by additional 42%. I should say that the first one just about increasing sort of public transportation, and I should say reducing vehicle ownership is a huge 71% reduction. And then the other one is about recycling, which is an additional kind of 50% from the previous scenario. And I'm sure Mona is going to get much more into kind of consumption and recycling at the next session. Another kind of key diagram to this, this is a comparative chart of a giant EV, the e-Hummer, a regular sort of EV, an electric bus, and then an electric bike. And so what you can see in the light blue is kind of the quantity of lithium kind of per battery. And then the dark blue is kind of the lithium per rider capacity. And so obviously the Hummer has sort of the lowest ratio in that respect. So it's using the most lithium per kind of rider. Even though the bus has a huge battery, it's carrying a lot more people, so it's thus more efficient. But you can see the e-bike there at the bottom is really kind of this a golden ticket in a way. And if anyone's who ever has ridden an e-bike, it's glorious. It's easy, it's fun. You arrive to work without being drenched in sweat. I realize it's different when it's kind of cold out, but they're becoming more and more popular in places like Denver, or at least somewhere in Colorado. Maybe it's Boulder. Had tremendous success with incentivizing e-bike purchases. And so this kind of gets into kind of the numbers. And then the other half, or maybe another part of that is kind of more of kind of the heart and mind of a community or of a population. And obviously we need to be sort of tackling this from every angle. And so by no means am I discouraging, you know, technological investment or innovation, but there's, as this report showed, there's a lot of much more effective ways to actually reduce our sort of exploitation of kind of the planetary boundaries. And so part of this is just to really sort of illustrate that this isn't necessarily a sacrifice to quality of life. Quality of life can actually improve through some of these changes. And so, I mean, I've been kind of working on this kind of in sort of initial forays in a way. So it's very incomplete at this time. So I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I've been this current book project I'm working on is a collection of kind of contributing authors that sort of describe these sort of externalities and complications and exploitations across kind of the green energy supply chain. But there's going to be a sort of mirrored part of the book that sort of tracks that with sort of counter narratives or fictional projections that begin to explore alternatives through kind of short stories and somewhat of a sort of graphic novel approach. And so this was actually looking at lithium with respect to the solar, with the landscape itself being one character that begins to kind of talk about sort of this deep time. There's also sort of this school class visit to a new facility, kind of greenhouses around these evaporation ponds. So it's about sort of still allowing the sun, or I should say harnessing the sun to sort of evaporate the water to get the sort of the concentrated lithium, as well as, you know, other things that are involved with that, to be able to then return that condensed water, or that water that would condense on the surface of the greenhouse, return that back to the aquifer itself. As well as kind of previous miners kind of returning to this kind of to understand or kind of reflect on this change over time. And I've had included some other pieces of sort of the local indigenous communities beginning to kind of claim ownership, and as well as a significant stake in sort of the profits of these operations. So there's sort of a buy-in, and there's a negotiation of kind of between landscape and the sort of community with an understanding of people that have lived in that area for long durations. But yeah, don't want to get too far into this sort of speculative fiction. I don't want to take up too much time either, so I'd love to kind of end it here and hand it over to the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was pretty incredible from the critical standpoint to see how you're starting to project some ideas over the future. Marina, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about perhaps a reality that is less discussed these days in relation to lithium, and is the situation in the south of Europe, in particular in Spain and in Portugal. And I'm going to do it through a work that I was working on in the last years in Portugal, and that manifested in an exhibition, and that there was a long process of collaboration with some communities who are protesting a lithium mine that is planned in their lands. And the project is called Deseos Compulsivos, which translates like compulsive desires. And it's called Compulsive Desires, Lithium Extraction and Rebellious Mountains. So years ago, I started to look into automation, automated architectures, and also all the digital infrastructures. And I was intrigued. I was trying to follow the pipes somehow, like from the greenhouses, automated factories, and data centers, and where the pipes were lead. And well, they lead in some occasions to places of extraction, like the lithium mines. We started looking into the questions of extraction in Atacama in Chile. And that was the object of a study for an exhibition that we did at the New Institute when I was director of research there, together with Anastasia Kubrak as principal investigator, researcher. And we partner with Ediciones ARQ, connected to Universidad Católica de Chile, and the editor, Francisco Diaz, to do a book on that particular situation, obviously to have voices coming from different perspectives and ground the work in Chile in itself. But after a few years working in Atacama, and today I'm not going to talk necessarily about Atacama, although it has been the focus of my research for a while. While I was doing the work, I started to understand that the quest of Europe to be energy independent has led to the kind of the attempt to open new mines in the continent. And some of the mines were actually, replicating these kind of tensions between North and South. So thinking about the global South, most of the mining spaces were, at least at the beginning, planned in places like Portugal, Spain, Serbia, Czech Republic, that are some of them with the lowest, somehow rent in certain ways compared to others like Germany or the Netherlands, who probably will be the ones where the battery factories are located. So again, sites of extractions and sacrifice zones where they are located. And one of them is located in this incredible place that surprisingly, has been selected to have one of the biggest mines in Europe, and yet is agricultural patrimony of UNESCO, and also a place of incredible biodiversity and century-long traditions. So this is in the north of Portugal, and is the area of Barroso. It's a mountainous region that borders with Galicia in the north of Spain. And this is Covas de Barroso. As you can see, it's an old village where traditions are very much kept, both in their, relations, multi-species relations, the form in which agriculture and farming are performed, that are using the techniques that have been used for generations, for centuries, and also holds incredible traditions like the carnival that are very, very grounded in this particular region, and also bring different understandings of the relation between these populations and the mountains. So the mountains are not seen as something, a resource to be extracted, but something, an entity that is coexists and is from which all these different beings are part. This is Aida Fernandez, and together with Nelson Gomez have been one of the, people living in Covas, that they are farmers. They, they deal with cows and farming, but they have to be transforming activists because they realize that most of the place where they live will be occupied by a huge hole for extracting lithium. How they learn that is that they give permission to a company to do some prospections in a particular site, and that actually the prospections were not listing lithium as one of the minerals or elements of interest in that study. But the company actually did the prospections elsewhere. They didn't have permission to do the prospections where they did. This is one of the kind of evidences of that activity. And they did find lithium. And then they asked, permission for the government to go further. And because of the energy transition policies in the Netherlands, in the Europe and in Portugal, well, then the government make it a priority. So it's accelerating the, approval of certain mines that, without necessarily having all the environmental impact reports and necessary consent from the population. In Chile has been a long history of, lithium mining and mining in general. And in that case, there are many already mechanisms through which there are consultation to the local communities, to the indigenous communities, and forms of reparation, and forms in which, as we were discussing before, there are forms of redistribution. That is not the case yet in Portugal or in Europe just yet. So it's a very accelerated project that is supported by this idea of Europe by independent energetically. So it's a very ideological position. Soon after, the company, Savannah Resources, opened an office in the center of the village. It was quite a small village, so it was quite, prominent, the presence of the company. But by the way, it's not at all a mining company. It's a company with a very little presence in Portugal, then with headquarters in London that is only, a code in a, post office. And actually, it's an investment company. What they are doing is speculating on the possibility of having lithium to make money, to make profits. But in a way, none of these companies probably will end up mining the site. It's just like they are creating expectation, creating the profit out of the speculation of the finding lithium in the site. So we have to understand that many times these processes are not even intended for actually getting the resources and creating other added value in any way to society. They are also forms of speculation. And in the office, they show, what is lithium, how it is used, and they try to inform the population about the mine and what will be the impacts, mostly beneficial for the community. They fail to recognize the many environmental impacts, but also social impacts that the mine will actually have in this territory. But there are many people who are aware of them. So there is a huge kind of resistance against the possibility of this mine. There is a very important movement with different, most of the population in Covas and the nearby villages, some of them like Montalegre, they are also have a mine plant, and many other like regions, but also forms of solidarity with people from all over the world that, the Zapatistas in Mexico, the people in Chile who have been fighting mining companies for decades, and many other people from the rest of the world that come to Covas in support. It's interesting, some of those slogans, not to mines, yes to life. And there is like this idea of like the importance of water in many cases for in the case of lithium, because lithium mining, we have to remind ourselves, is a water extraction enterprise. So both in Atacama, but also here, in order to extract lithium, whether it will be from evaporation pools or directly digging into the ground, it actually affects the aquifers heavily. So when we are getting lithium, we are actually getting a lot of water that then we deplete these spaces that are affected by drought and harsh conditions, and the water is life. So these are, you find these messages across these communities. And for instance, this one is in Atacama, that clearly puts it like, do I drink lithium? Do I eat copper? Kind of asking us to put our priorities in where, where is the future we want to hold, and how it's possible that we get rid of sources of, drinking in favor of batteries. So what I'm interested primarily is to see different perspectives on this question. On the one hand, the understanding of the mountain, not necessarily as a resource, not as necessarily as something that is not alive, and is just like a repository of minerals that can be extracted. And that's the idea that mining company and extractivism give us. This idea that, the Cartesian grid can be placed on top of an ecosystem and define the places where to extract and where not to extract. In front of those perspectives, there are more indigenous and local perspectives that see the mountain as an entity, as a living being, and a part of an ecosystem that is based on interdependence of different living beings. I'm very interested in the work of Michael Marder in relation to energy, because basically Michael Marder traces the history of the term of energy, conceptions of energy. And at the beginning, energy was what it is, but it became soon this idea of something that we have to accumulate and then release. And that energy sometimes is accumulated in the entrails of the earth and the mountains. And in order to get it, we just break the mountain and kill everything in between just to get hold of these deposits. But it's also this idea that we are always in the lack of energy. There is something that we have to get somewhere else, accumulate and release. That's very problematic, both if we think about the level of the planet, but also about our own bodies and the continuous form of exhaustion. So I'm interested also in this notion of exhausting the planet and exhausting ourselves. I will get better. This is a stone that contains lithium, and I bring it because it's extremely beautiful, and in a way it's an object of desire. And here we are talking about forms of desiring, what type of futures we desire. If we are positioning ourselves like as a consumerist society where we want more batteries, electric vehicles, and phones, computers, etc., or what we desire is a different relation with the planet and its resources. As has been said before, lithium is used for batteries, so powering the system, and is imagined as this kind of almost mythical, magical substance that will be able to decoupling the, capitalism from fossil fuels. At the same time, lithium has been also used, and I'm going to focus a bit more on that, for treating mania, as was called, or like bipolar disorders. So it was also used for modulating the brain, like the moods of humans. So this kind of this tension for me was interesting, both the kind of energy of the planet and the well-being of the human. The exhibition that it was a long process to do an exhibition, because I did an exhibition before in the Netherlands, but for me it was important to engage with the community, understand the situation in Portugal. So the exhibition is only the, one of the outcomes of a long-term relation with the sites and understanding the, the concerns that the community had against lithium. And it was also organized in the municipal galleries of Porto. So for me, it was very important that this exhibition will become a political forum, a place that is a public place where people can understand and debate the type of futures they want to have for, the world. This is a work by Maarten van Heijden, and talks about the different components that are taken from lithium, and it was somehow at the beginning of the exhibition. But what you find when you enter the exhibition will be this video of all these people from Covas de Barroso, and who are singing a protest song in which they are saying basically that they were having lives as a farmers and they have to take the arms and struggle and protest against the mine because that was the only option that was left to them. So in the exhibition, this song was playing continuously, creating the kind of the sound environment of the entire space in a way to remember why we were there and for whom. When we did the opening, we also invited the community and they also were singing in person. And it was an incredible moment because many people are not aware of the consequences of lithium extraction. And listening to that from, firsthand from the people who are going to have their mine 200 meters from their places, it was a very powerful moment. And many people got mobilized after this moment that was holding this public space. So obviously there was a reivindication. I don't, hide my position in this case. I'm against the extraction of lithium in this particular place and in many others also in other places around the world. And for many reasons that perhaps we want to discuss, but I didn't hide my positionality when doing this exhibition. And at the same time, the exhibition was also open for people to disagree. And we have many public spaces for people to come and talk and discuss. And one of the objectives was also create this public conversation that we also did it in the main newspaper in Portugal, Público. So was the idea of create a public opinion that will be able to perhaps add something to the process that was going on by which the government had to give approval to the plans of the company to extract lithium, which has been the case. Despite that many different reports, environmental reports and work of many people, still the European Union and the Portuguese government prioritizes extraction in front of environmental considerations, which is a bit, questionable. So what we did is we commissioned a few people, researchers, to do projects that will also help the community to, prove what will be the impacts of lithium extraction and that the company clearly are not disclosing, not being transparent about it. So Godofredo Pereira, Tiago Batatas, and others we're doing this almost forensic investigation, locating where there will be the pit and what will be the implications for the environment in terms of sound and pollution, and obviously very important, the implications for the water bodies that are in the region and the watershed, which is going to be very dramatic. These are Nelson and Aida, so were also their oral histories, their voices were very present. And there were interventions by different artists reflecting on, these forms of understanding the mountain, the idea of the prospection, breaking the earth. And this moment that was very traumatic, this is Susana Suarez, a moment that was very traumatic to the community when, they realized that they had been misled and their fate was signed somehow. Or other projects that look also into recovering the flora and fauna of a lithium mine in Republica of Congo as a way that this acts as a map, but also a seed library in case, the species that are inhabiting certain places affected by extractivism are disappearing. But there was also this obsession about why we need more energy. Why, as it was said before in the previous conversation, we need more coal. So what is the meaning of that? That even though that, the technologies seem to be more efficient, we keep on needing more energy. So there is something compulsive about our relation with energy that we have to, understand and acknowledge. And so this is Leanne Weisman, that she digs tunnels. And I was interested in bringing this idea of why we need this compulsion to dig deeper into the earth and need more and more energy to keep on living in this planet. There was something embodied about that. What is that trigger us? In addition, obviously, to economy. And there was certain reflections trying to bring this relation that we have with, our life, our bodies. So there was this screen that you can use your phone to light and draw up on, but in a way was a way to have in your hand the phone and the battery, lithium battery, and reflect on your relation with that. So at the end, I'm bringing these two images because this conception of the mountain as a living entity, but also as just a resource to be extracted, and how we imagine this form of extraction that is also connected to our own bodies. So this compulsive desire for more is also, permeating our relation with work, with our relation with our own lives. So we are digging the mountains as we are digging our bodies. And also digging the mountain is not only breaking that type of ecosystem, but also the communities around them. These processes are very damaging for the communities because they create frictions. Some people want to sell their land, some others, they don't want to sell the land. So they create frictions and social breakup in communities that have been, surviving for centuries. And suddenly there is like this extractivism affecting not only the ecosystem, but also affecting, the community very intensively. So I was reflecting on this understanding of our relation with the mountain as a site to go deeper and deeper, go deeper into the layers, discarding layers just to find the resource that we are looking forward. And when we go to the depth, what we find is El Tío, for instance, in the Latin American countries, you find the devil that is, the only one who protects you when you are deep there. So reflecting of these relations with myths, more than human epistemologies, ideas of geology that transcend the centrality of the human, but also look at different understandings of our relations with land. We invited different artists. This is Noemi Rincon Gallardo, reflecting also on landscapes of extraction in Mexico, and says mining kills. But also it's about this kind of, again, compulsivity and desire for dragging all the resources, but all other forms of mitigation that had to go with an understanding of humans in relation to other species. And that was a lot about it in the exhibition. So Jonas Stahl reflecting on the species that had gone extinct due to human actions, and all of them have the name comrade, camarada. So forms of allyship that we have to establish in order to overcome this extractivist mindset and find other forms of relationality. In Portugal, in this part of the peninsula and Europe, this has a very particular form that is the carnival. So in the carnival, is actually the opposite of extractivism, the opposite of the abstraction that is leading the mining industry. In the carnival, we embodied other beings, we embodied the mountain. So everything that is civilized is transformed. The brute force of the mountain takes the streets of the city. And humans are no longer humans, but are a combination of animals and devils and other creatures, creating solidarities and forms of allyship that allows us to think about our place in the world in a different way. Why I bring it is because the people from Covas has been using these old traditions, ancient traditions, to actually protest. So sometimes these communities, as was said before, are portrayed as backwards because they don't want to accept progress. Progress is lithium, right? Progress is the smart city, is the electric vehicle. And because they are protesting it, they are seen as backwards. Sometimes these places are rendered as non-existent, as if nothing is there. And they embody this and actually give it back. And they use this carnival as protesting in front of the authorities and in a way of a performative way of creating resistance. But I was also interested in this other part of lithium that is connected to mental health. And we were making a, beautiful attempt to, not to the not to naturalize necessarily, but in a way, not stigmatize these conditions, but understand profoundly the relation with mental health and extractivism through the lens of lithium. And as I said, how lithium mining affects communities and the mental health of these communities. And at the end, what we want to bring is this obsession that we have and how this is affecting in many different scales, how to inspect our relations, how to think about a different way of being. In relation to manufacturing, instead of bringing battery factories, I'm going to bring another side of manufacturing that is also present in this territory. And it's connected to lithium waters. So as I said, lithium, we are discussing mostly as a element for batteries, but it's also for health, well-being, in the form of a pill that we can take, but also in the form of waters that we bath in, that we intake. And that has been known since antiquity, since even previous to the Romans, at least in this region. So the mountains in this region, they not only hold the mineral, they also hold the lithium waters that sometimes just emerge to the surface, they erupt. So since ancient times, there is known that there are some spaces where the lithium waters, like thermal waters with health properties, are emerging, and the population has been gathering around them and creating architectures around them. So first perhaps was just like a hole where, then a fountain where people will go and everyone will know that these waters will be good for digestion or for skin or for many other aspects of health. But from the small fountain, in certain cases, they developed an entire touristic that merge well-being and tourism complexes and also manufacturing complexes. This is, for instance, in Pedras Salgadas is one of them that became a very important destination and is still existing. And Pedras Salgadas is also one of the most consumed lithium, actually sparkling waters in Portugal. So most of the chances you have that you go to a restaurant and if you ask for sparkling water, you will get Pedras Salgadas. That has lithium. This is Vidago as well. And there was these landscapes, these architectures where people will go to heal from the excesses of industrialization, from the exhaustion of modernity. Obviously, there were upper classes coming to these places, but places like that, perhaps less, bourgeois or sophisticated in terms of the architecture, are found all over the territory of Spain, and Galicia, and north of Portugal. So these places were balnearios, were for treatment, but also were for social relations. There are golf clubs and dance floors, etc. But you can see the tension between how the water comes directly from the mountains and then how it has been manufactured in these bottles that then it became one of the biggest industries in the region. So what became something just a kind of a gossip, like people knows that these waters are healthy, then it became an entire industry. And the industry that, again, brings back the notion of the body and the environment in a very particular way. But also this idea of well-being and futures, the type of somehow promises that these substances have. In lithium, clearly this idea of progress without fossil fuels, but in lithium waters, also the idea of enhancing your mood. Actually, 7-Up, that we all know, started also like a lithium water that was commercialized to, keep you smiling, to enhance the mood of housewives and people in moments that perhaps they were concerned by the war or the, economy in the country. In the 2008 financial crisis, countries like Greece were considering adding lithium to the tap water to actually control the mood of populations that were also affected by, the financial measures imposed by the Troika. And in Portugal was the same. These lithium waters were announced as something that, will keep you high, smiling, active, the same as the batteries keep our economy running, lithium does the same to our bodies. And these are some pictures of, this summer of some of these fountains and these, infrastructures for water that are still operating, obviously, under a different lens. And when you go there, you are promised many things. If you drink this water, victory, fame, glory, triumph, commerce. So all these kind of ideals are connected to this water, these resources. This is how it operated. You go to the fountain, you could drink, but soon they were bottling it and commercialized. And even today, you can still taste these waters. Some of them are still to be, recovered. There was a moment of decay in that region, and now there's flourishing again. And for me, this is important. Some of these are incredible places that are connected to manufacturing industries. So this beautiful place is just next to this one, because this one from here is where the waters were taken and then bottled and commercialized to the entire country and beyond. This is Mondariz in Cabreiroa, is in Galicia. It's the same, like this beautiful space where you can still taste water. That is right next to this bottling plant. So, the tourism and commerce are coming together in these very particular landscapes that are taking the resources from the mountain and distribute them. The same is La Toja, where they also produce soaps and other. But what is interesting is that Europe portrays the need of lithium and the opening of mines as a priority for, energy transition and to the Green Deal. At the same time, the same European Union portrays this region as a region to protect the water bodies because of the importance of the thermal activity and the thermal waters in this region. The question is, both of them are not possible, are contradictory policies that come from the same political bodies. And so one is affecting the other. If lithium extraction goes ahead, the water bodies will be affected, and then entire industry of balneariums and water will also be affected. And it's incredible that sometimes we are not able to see the whole picture, and we just see fragmented aspects of our world, the battery and the waters as separate entities, while we know that they are interconnected. I bring this image because for me, it's very dramatic. This is in Covas de Barroso. It's one of the rivers where people gather. And every time that we gather in support of the community protesting the lithium mine, we bath in these waters to actually fill out with our bodies kind of these energy processes that we are talking about, not to keep it always abstract in terms of graphs and numbers, but bring it to the level of the embodied knowledge. And the mountain that you see in front, it will disappear. This is where the mine will be. So just to like sometimes when we think about these landscapes in abstraction with the Cartesian grid in front of us, we fail to recognize the many sacrifices that we have to make for having electric vehicles. And yeah, these are all the places, but yeah, this is an incredible place similar to that is lithium waters and coming from the mountain that have been known since antiquity, since the Romans. The Romans recognized this resource and created this bath. And these are public baths, unlike the other ones that are balneariums and very sophisticated architectures. This is an incredible architecture of metabolic processes where our bodies connects with the body of the planet and the different energy processes that are still that are happening for thousands and thousands of years. Thank you so much.
Marina, thank you so much for making us feel the place and the struggle. It was incredible. Scott, I'm gonna leave you the floor. All yours.
Thank you. Let me find my notes here. I'm actually just one floor below all the students there. So you're on the third floor. Hello, and I'm on the second floor. But I will resist the temptation to run up there. First, thanks to Mona and Maria for the invitation. I was a little surprised because though I work a lot on sustainability and economic development, and this issue about lithium mining certainly lies at the intersection of economy and environment. I am new to notions about lithium, although I think one thing one realizes is once you start reading about lithium, you realize how much we have already been using it. And special thanks to Marina and Matthew, just wonderful presentations, very thoughtful, beautiful images, a lovely mix of scientific and poetic. So my role is simply to be a discussant. It's 6:30 here in Ann Arbor. So I will try to be quick. So I do not have slides, just 10 points, and hopefully you can see them in the background. As they were talking, I was writing down points, and so hopefully they're visible. I'll try not to block them. So the first thing is, it's lovely that Marina talked about the other use of lithium, because I think for many people, one is aware of lithium as a use in psychiatry, but and vaguely in batteries, and one wondering if that's just a fluke of nature. It also made me realize that we often talk about in the green transition, talking about silicon used in photovoltaic cells. And silicon is a very abundant material, a fairly large percent of the Earth's crust. But I did check, and lithium, though it is number 3 on the periodic chart, it goes hydrogen, helium, and then lithium. So it's fairly simple, is actually a very small fraction of a percent of the Earth. And as Marina talked about, it's fascinating that it was this not well-known Australian psychiatrist who was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and was a head of a psychiatric unit, or a very primitive one, and was trying to see the connections between perhaps nutritional deficiencies, which were very common in a prisoner of war camp during World War II. And then after the war, experimented with various issues and discovered that, in fact, lithium was effective. One of the challenges, of course, of lithium was getting the right dosage, and maybe that's the moral of the story. I think the motto in batteries is more lithium, the better. And as Matthew, I think, powerfully pointed out, Americans tend to want very big cars, which require very big batteries. But the lesson from psychiatry is quite different, that you have to have the right dosage of lithium. Too little, it has no effect, but too much, it is toxic and people die. And that's something that Dr. John Cade in Australia struggled with, was finding the right dosage. The second point, and I think Matthew made this point and others, is, and it's a point that many people make, but it's important to remember, is that when we speak about the transition to renewables, to sustainable, to carbon neutral, we often, certainly we planners and architects, tend to draw images of before the messy industrial city and then the clean green city with greenhouses and all of that. But it's just a reminder that the transition is messy, it's material, it's extractive. And I think one of the powers of what we as planners and designers and landscape architects do is just remind us of the tangible, messy, physical implications of clean energy. And I really loved Matthew's maps as tools to just remind us of, to make this visible, that lithium has quite a footprint, as do other raw materials. As an aside, as an urban planner, I always admire that urban designers and architects tend to make much more beautiful maps than we planners do. So perhaps one lesson about this is that there's no such thing as a free lunch, that as long as we continue to heavily use energy, we will pay the price. 3 is this question of, you often hear that will a new technology or new mineral remap our world? We now speak of a battery belt Lithium Valley. And in a way, this may be new, but this is part of a longer tradition. The whole history of the Industrial Revolution has been the location and exploitation of various minerals, be it petroleum, gold, silver, coal, recently natural gas and shale in hydraulic fracturing or fracking. And I think that that's a responsibility that we often, as you might say, urbanists are about, which is to remind us of just not just the materiality, but just to show them on a map is just to remind people these places are big, and to remind us they have a very big footprint. Will lithium actually fundamentally remap our geography? I'm not so sure. I think in those specific places that Matthew and Marina showed us, the places of mining, it will have a huge impact. It will have an impact on trucking. It will have an impact on where these battery plants are. Those images, Matthew, of Tesla's factory, they're massive. So they will have a very powerful selective local impact. But I think in some ways we are secretly or not so secretly relieved that those locations that will probably be most impacted are far away from us, a kind of guilty pleasure. And particularly the nature of lithium is they are often in distant deserts, in brine fields. So they tend to be places far from cities, even more remote than a lot of natural gas fracking. So in a way, it allows us to not think about it. And perhaps that's one of our tasks, is to remind people to think about it. Perhaps the real spatial change needed is not about where it is mined or produced or refined, but is the one that is not happening enough. And I think both Matthew and Marina nicely foreshadowed this, which is, of course, we as urbanists think that the most powerful pathway to sustainability is compact, dense, walkable, transit-friendly land use patterns. That's the spatial change that is needed. Perhaps that's the one we need to focus on. And the fear is that these batteries will allow us to continue to live in our American low-density landscape, connecting everything by car trip. The only change is these cars once were powered by gasoline and now by batteries, but that's a marginal change. So 4, I'm reminded that here again is another rush, another boom mentality. We know the history of the gold rush and others. We think that we have learned, that we've moved on from that old distractive mentality. But yet again, we greedily fall for it one more time. 5, I think what's challenging is to know which of these projects to oppose and which not. There's quite a, you might say, NIMBY or YIMBY, not in my backyard or yes in my backyard argument. There are certain circumstances where you might think that this is a classic David versus Goliath story, and the environmentalists are that David, but it puts environmentalists in a tricky position to protect one natural environment, but does that slow down the transition to cleaner energy. So I think that the issue about this is complicated. 6, I think another challenge is there's a rhetoric of energy independence and renewable energy, and there's a strong nationalistic tone to this. You hear this in the US Congress these days, and nationalism is certainly a growing problem. And so I think dealing with all of this will have to deal with that kind of rhetoric. 7, all of this made me think about batteries. We deal with batteries all the time. It's kind of built into our lives of charging stations and so on. And to think somewhat conceptually, I'm sure this is very obvious to many of you, but I think one power about batteries is that it allows you to kind of push against time and space. Energy generated now can be used later, and energy generated in one place can be stored in a battery, and we can take it with us in our car, in our pockets. and our laptop cases and so on. And in a way, that's what modern society is technologies that allow us to push against the old limitations of time and space. We do this with food storage, with refrigeration, water storage, and dams. Our whole modern capitalist financial system is built upon the storage of capital, of loans that allow us to kind of take future earnings and apply it to present day cash flows and so on. It frees us from the limitations of generating energy on site and use in real time. But of course, this technology that breaks through the limits of time and space also comes at a cost of nature. It may make us more resilient, but it may make nature less so. 3 more points. I think also, batteries, as we have learned, the race about batteries is to be able to concentrate more energy in a smaller space. Your cell phones are sold by having battery life. Cars are sold by how far they could go. And again, this is a tradition of modern society, of developing technologies that allow us to concentrate wealth, information, energy, calories, people in cities. In fact, you might even argue somewhat in a grandiose way that the entire Industrial Revolution, and thus the urban revolution, was dependent on developing technologies and human practices and institutions of concentrating nature in tight spaces: coal, cotton, iron ore, food, wood, grain, edible animals, and stockyards, all displaced from their original location. And again, when you think about how rare lithium is, and then how concentrated it is. So we create these kinds of artificial concentrations, and that is quite remarkable. And I don't mean to minimize that. But the flip side, of course, of the concentration of good things is the concentration of pollution, of waste, of weapons, of toxins, of viruses, COVID, and otherwise. So there's a kind of Janus face or two-faced of this. And one might say, does the concentration of good things come invariably with a concentration of toxins? So it's curious that lithium, and here's the actual percentage, it's 0.0017 of the Earth's crust. So less than 1/100th, almost about a 1,000th of 1%. So as we extend great efforts to gather up this rather dispersed element, concentrated in our cars, our phones, our laptops, to in turn be able to concentrate electrical energy in a small portable space, energy generated by another source, often concentrated, such as coal or gas. And this, of course, leads to the concentration of mining activities, of massive factories, and so on. And overall, we know that scale economies continue to rule. So to be competitive in this market, you go big, which Matthew's photos of Tesla reminds us. And we also have learned that the concentration in batteries also raises the risk of fire. And it's an interesting term that we have all learned called thermal runaway, as if the electrons that should behave well within batteries and stay in their place are kind of like illegal migrants fleeing their regulated capture in our devices. 2 more points. I guess the question is, do we view lithium as a transitional material for batteries? Just like we might call hybrid cars or natural gas a transitional technology to a more sustainable future? Or are we going to have to learn to live with lithium for a long time? I'm hoping that it's transitional, but I'll leave that for the scientists. And finally, can we imagine a future with less batteries and less lithium? Or, as I fear, are we going in the other direction? As I said, the use of batteries is yet another technology, like banks and stockyards and many other things, to both concentrate. It's a spatial strategy and a temporal strategy, but it puts added demands on our ability to concentrate rare and often valuable materials. And this trend will likely continue despite our calls for zero carbon living. And such technologies of storage allow us to concentrate even more energy in one place. And thus, the better the battery, the more we consume. And I think Marina, in a lovely way, I'm really glad you talked about this, thoughtfully expressed your astonishment at just this human compulsion to consume. And in a way, these technologies allow us to sidestep the other conversation, which is about conservation and consuming less. So let me conclude by saying all of this, the presentations have been a reminder for me that there are two paths to sustainability in a carbon neutral future: the technology path and the conservation path. And for us as architects and planners and urban designers, we really think that redesigning cities to be more efficient and have a smaller environmental footprint is the way to go. Of course, we need both the technology and the design, but I fear, as I look across the street to the College of Engineering that has over 10,000 students, and we have less than 1,000, and their budget is much bigger, that we keep subsidizing and prioritizing the technology path much more than the conservation path. And so here again is one more plea. If we shrink our homes, our cars, and our commute distances, maybe the goal should be not to make a more efficient battery alone, but to reduce our dependence on batteries. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Scott. There was an applause here, just for you to know, but I was not fast enough to click on the sound, so yeah, to miss it. Thank you so much for these incredible remarks and bring us, I think, full circle. I think, you know, for us here in this room, this presentation have been particularly inspiring because, as you can tell, we have been already contending how to engage the planet, but not to abandon our bodies, how to talk about the desire of having better futures, but not to forget about where those better futures are going to be, perhaps having a not so positive outcome. And it was amazing to, in a way, bring us, I think, back to think the mountain, to feel the water, and to resituate ourselves in an incredibly important challenge that we have ahead. How truly reimagine ourselves and our own agency as designers. So I want to first know if there is any response. Matthew, I know you may need to leave like in 2 minutes. Marina, I don't know if you want to respond to Scott in any way or to each other. And I would like to do that before we hear if there are any questions or remarks coming from the students on this side.
I mean, I think Scott did an amazing job kind of summarizing and reflecting a lot of the things Marina and I sort of put forth. And so I don't know, I think it's best to turn it to the students if there's any questions. But maybe Marina disagrees.
No, yes, I agree. But I was just like very interested in what Scott said about the concentration of time and space, and I think that's very, it's something that we can work with, and what will mean to expand times and considering like a space differently, so we understand the implications in longer periods, longer territories of what our actions are, and that has to do with also how we calculate efficiency and profitability. And sometimes the externalities that are left aside when we calculate how profitable an exploitation of amenities and so on. So when we think about the transition, I'm always worried that I'm portrayed as someone supporting fossil fuels because I'm, arguing against lithium extraction, but that's not the case. I'm in favor of different energy cultures. And I think Scott was hinting towards that, like how that other energy cultures could be. And if it's not about like not having mines in one place and having in other, but also considering, you know, urban mining, like considering already the amount of devices and recycling of batteries that could be organized. And generally that said that it's not, you know, efficient, that is not profitable, that is, but it is because, you know, in the other actions, they are not counting, you know, the real effects that they have over long periods of time for environments and communities. That is not included so often in the Excel sheet. So I think it is possible. I think I'm optimistic in the sense that I see other ways, I see other paths for us to follow. I just hope that is, as Scott was saying, we were a bit more people thinking about that and working on that direction. And unfortunately, too often, the technological solutions are the only ones that, you know, are gathering attention and traction.
Well, let's see if we can counteract that a little bit. Any questions, comments, things that you would like to share? Yeah, do it. You may need to come a little bit closer so that, yeah, they can hear you. There you go.
Hello, Matthew. My name is Ilya Mela. Thank you so much for that super informative presentation. I was really inspired by your graphics, how you represented your thought process, and then how you worked through the design. And so I was just quite curious, at what points do you employ mapping and graphical, another graphical representation in your design or research process? Is it from early on or midway, or do you just purely use it for to just kind of like communicate your ideas?
No, that's a great question. I mean, I use like any representational format is really a way of thinking. So it's at every point along the research phase, from just gathering imagery to kind of get a feel for a certain topic to, you know, the kind of quantitative side of data visualization when you begin to try to actually make a narrative or argument supported by data that is available or gathered or kind of generated, and then even to something that's much more kind of like projective or more kind of oriented around social effects and dynamics. And just recently been using AI as sort of generated sort of source material to then kind of produce some of my own sort of collages, which you saw at the end of the presentation. So yeah, really, it's I mean, much like you might just think of hand drawing as not just a way to kind of communicate a final idea, but as a way to kind of think through process, right? It's a method of kind of thinking and reflection. And I generally like to sort of kind of waffle or kind of alternate between both the sort of analog and digital. I mean, I didn't show much analog work today, but also sort of the qualitative and the quantitative to get that more kind of rich understanding of topics that can both be supported by data, but also begin to actually reach people that aren't, you know, specialists in data, or sort of weave those kind of stories and narratives that can have a much kind of more profound effect. Because I mean, we all know about the climate crisis. We've had the data for forever, and yet we haven't been able to kind of mobilize the masses to kind of take action. But yeah, thank you for your question, and be happy to answer any more questions and email or elaborate on anything. But unfortunately, I do have to go to put my son to bed. But again, really appreciate being a part of this discussion, and I hope to kind of continue these threads that we've brought forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you.
Hello, Marina. I have one question for you too. So I do recall you mentioned how you outrightly against lithium mining in places like Atacama and other regions of the world. I also share that view, but I was just wondering if there are certain conditions where you consider it okay for lithium mining, if there's ever any condition, where you consider it's okay for lithium mining. And then also I was just thinking if you have any opinions as to a sustainable alternative for fossil fuels.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I think before we open a new mine, there should be some consideration of other paths to follow. And for instance, reducing consumption, as Scott was pointing to, or recycling batteries, as it is possible to do. So there are many ways in which for instance, what I'm not in favor of is to say that in order to do a transition from individual vehicles that use fossil fuels to individual vehicles that use lithium batteries, first of all, I don't think that is sustainable at all. That is not changing the paradigm of that in the direction we should go. It's just a consumerist approach. It's a consumer object for a consumer object, and it's to appease certain companies that sell cars, among others. But it's not really, putting us in the direction where we should go in terms of what we need for cities or society in terms of energy and resources, because we will always need something else. So obviously, I think that for certain uses, lithium as other resources are fundamental. And I'm not against extracting resources because we need something. I mean, I wish we will be able to live with much less, but even in the transition, we need something. But what are the guarantees that are given for that to happen? First of all, I mean, to balance out, the needs that we have and to assess them a bit better instead of just opening more and more mines and extracting more and more. And the second, so I think before we keep on thinking about opening new mines, we have to reflect on patterns of consumption first. But second, if we decide that we still need to extract, give the proper framework for that, like having the forms of consent by the communities that are going to be suffering the implications of that activity, to make a long-term plan on how the areas are going to be regenerated, to give compensations for the communities, and many other things. There are places, even Chile, that even the government recently announced certain ways of mitigating the impacts and having very clear paths for participatory politics and including the indigenous and local communities in these decision-making processes. That, for instance, in the regions that I also studied or being with in Portugal, that's not the case. So Europe is supposed to be one of progressive areas of the world, but in this case it's quite behind certain other places, and so there are ways in which we can operate, but I want to explore more. So instead of just saying open new mines, okay, patterns of consumption, recycling existing materials. And then if there is no other choice, okay, let's do it, but let's do it with certain guarantees, certain processes that allow for the communities that are going to take the burden for all of us to be, part of the process and taken care of well.
Thank you so much, Marina. I'm going to take on this. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and it's almost 7, and I want to be respectful. If there is any question coming from the screen, our other grid, the Zoom grid, we can attend to it. Otherwise, I'm going to slowly... Yeah, Mona?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just want to thank everyone. This was really an amazing panel. Thank you, Marina, for, first, I wasn't even aware about the mines in Europe, because they are not in the faraway land, right? They are right around the corner. And I really loved the way how you created the connection between the abstraction of a mind somewhere and then myth and culture and the embodiment. I think this is something that is extremely important, that we need to understand how we need to feel what we are doing to the environment. And I also believe that the reduction of consumption is the only way forward, actually, because at the moment we are sitting on this gigantic avalanche that builds on the technologies and patterns of the old economy that is all about growth and all about more and more. And we need to stop this cycle, specifically when we want to turn into a more sustainable society. And I believe really that all contributions, Scott, thank you so much for summarizing this. I took a screenshot. You were always moving back and forth between your comments. Maybe if you could send this once more as a written text, that would be really fantastic. So moving away from the more, and actually also moving away from the smart and technology, because when you sit in an electric car, you will see that nothing is through manual labor anymore. Nothing. Actually, what should happen is that we save energy consumption, but everything is electric. So I can't open my window anymore with my own arm. So we are sitting on an avalanche that is really dangerous, and less is more in this whole context is really important. And it starts with ourselves and how we consume energy and how we maybe are able to sync cycles. If you put the solar cells on your roof and you have an electric car, the battery in your electric car can actually serve as a storage for your house. So you don't need a second battery. There are micro things that we can save as individuals. And I think this is really all very, very important. So I just want to thank you. It was an amazing contribution. And the discussion will continue next week and in general, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mona. Thank you, Marina. Scott, I also see Alejandra joining us from Santiago. Thank you so much. And please join us next Wednesday. We'll close the loop addressing consumption and recycling so that we can truly scrutinize other ways forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.